So the past few videos that I recorded were more about objective image quality. So basically things that will help make the base image better or higher quality, things like noise reduction and sharpening and using AI to improve the image. But I wanted to have some fun with this video. I want to kind of remind us that it's okay to actually do some funky things with our post processing. You don't have to go so far out there, but there are some things that I've discovered over the years. Sometimes I just forget about them. And then I'm reminded of them and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is actually a ton of fun. And it's something I want to share with you because when you use it sparingly and with the right type of photo, it can just completely change the look of the photo and give it, I don't want to say fine art look, but it's definitely a unique look. And so what I'm talking about here is using a path blur to take an image like this and then make it look like this. And it's super easy. It's just a few steps in Photoshop. And it's just something I think you'll enjoy. And before I do that, before we jump in, I just want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Brian. I'm a photographer that helps photographers like you get better looking photos using Lightroom and Photoshop and other third-party apps. So with that, let's jump right in. All right, so here, this is a photo I have of myself. I took it standing on Abraham Lake several years ago. And there are a few things that you want to consider when doing this technique. And the technique is basically using a path blur, just to tell you straight up. So if you go to filter and then blur gallery, not blur, but blur gallery, there's the path blur. And I'll show you that in a minute. But when you use it, there are a few things I found that are kind of helpful to determine whether the image is a good candidate for this process. The first is you ideally want to have your subject in the frame and you can see the entirety of the subject. So here you can see I'm standing here from head to toe. Also, the subject ideally won't take up too much of the frame. So you can see that I'm kind of a small portion of the overall composition. And also when there's a kind of a nice separation between the foreground and the background, which you can see the foreground is a frozen lake and the background is a mountain that's slightly out of focus. All right, so now we're ready to begin. The first thing I want to do is select this background here and duplicate it. To do that, you can right click and go to duplicate layer, or you can press Command J on Mac, Control J on Windows, and boom, we have a nice duplicate layer here. The next thing that I want to do is make a selection of myself. Very easy to do that, especially when the subject in your photo kind of is standing kind of apart from the background where there's a clear, distinct line. To do that, go to Select and then go to Subject. And you'll see that Adobe does a really nice job of making that selection around me. It's very tight. Of course, if that doesn't work or you need to modify it, you can use the lasso tool or the quick selection brush to get the selection that you need. All right, so now that I am selected, I want to put this selection on its own layer. And there's an easy way to do that. You just need to use the exact same keyboard shortcut we just used, which is Command J or Control J. And boom, now I am on my own layer. If I hide the underlying layers, you can see I am right there. But because I made that selection, or rather because I put that selection on its own layer, my selection has been deselected. There's a lot of selections in here. So we want to bring that selection back. Very easy way to do that. Just put your cursor on the thumbnail of this layer here. If you press and hold on Command or Control, Command on Mac, Control on Windows, you see that little icon that appears. So if I'm pressing Command and click, the selection is restored. Now, what I want to do is basically remove myself. And I can do that because I'm already selected. So here are a few things I'm going to do. First, I'm going to hide my selection layer. And here's what's important. You want to make sure that this layer is selected, not the layer with the selection duplication. So here we've got this layer selected. The other thing that I want to do is expand this selection to make the fill, the content aware fill, a little bit easier. If you're ever using content aware fill, generally you want to make the selection just a little bit larger than whatever the subject is that you're filling. To do that, I'm going to go to Select, Modify, and then go to Expand. Now, the number of pixels that you select, this will vary. Different people have different reasons for what they use. I'm just going with 30 here, and I'm going to click OK. And what that does is it uniformly expands the selection by 30 pixels around me. Okay, so now what I want to do is fill myself. And the easiest way to do that is to just press Shift and Delete on a Mac or Shift and Backspace on Windows, and it'll bring up the fill dialog box. And you want to make sure that under Contents that you have Content Aware selected. With that done, click OK, and I'm gone. Now, don't worry. I'm going to press Command D or Control D to deselect. Don't worry if it's not perfect, not a problem. But it's also no need to worry because boom, there I am. I'm right back. Now here comes the fun part. Here's where we start to add the blur. This one step here is optional. As long as you don't want to make any other kind of fill adjustments, you could always right click and go to Convert to Smart Object, which is advisable because it'll allow you to come back and adjust this blur. You'll know it's a smart object because of this icon on the bottom right corner of the thumbnail. And now we can go to Filter, Blur Gallery, and select Path Blur. Okay, so the difference between, say, a Gaussian blur and the path blur specifically is the path blur allows you to actually draw a path for the blur. Now, for this photo, I'm just going to keep this simple. I have another photo where we can get a little bit more fun. I'm just going to take this one end, put it down here, take the other hand and stretch it out and just kind of keep it straight. Now, it doesn't look anything special. And that's because the blur speed is still pretty low. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to increase that blur speed a lot. And now you start to get this really fun, it's a very abstract look. And this is the whole thing. This is kind of the look. You can get it even further and really tailor the look of the blur. And the reason why it's called a path blur is because the blur is following the path designated by this arrow. That's really all there is to it. There's another slider that's worth looking at, and that's the taper slider over here. The taper slider controls the length of these blurs. So you see how the blur creates these lines? If you increase the taper slider, it will decrease the length of these lines. So if I bring this out a little bit, you'll notice that the lines get a little bit shorter. And the blur effect, it just changes. It's not better or worse. It's just kind of how abstract you want the blur to be. So that's actually a good way to describe it. The more taper you use, the less abstract the blur. So totally up to you how much taper you want to use, but I think that's always good. And then the only other slider in this tool that I want you to focus on, if you want, under the noise tab over here on the bottom, adding a little bit of grain I think sometimes helps. Right now the blur is super smooth. And if I zoom in and I'll wait for the process to complete, you'll see that it's very smooth. And if I go ahead and add just a little bit of grain, it kind of adds a little bit of texture to the blur. You may not even see it. Like I can bring it up even more. And there you can see it's not noise, it's just grain. We don't really want that much, but usually 5 to 7%, I think, works. It just adds a little bit of texture to the photo because the blur takes away so much texture. And so with that, we're done with that kind of blur effect. I'm going to click OK. That's going to return us to Photoshop. And you can see that this layer is now blurred because it's on its own layer. We have the original layer preserved, and you might see where I'm going with this. Also, because we made it a smart layer, or a smart object rather, I can always go back to the blur gallery and adjust it if I want to. So it's kind of really a non-destructive editing workflow. But I do want to bring some of the reflection that you can see here because it kind of does look like I'm floating. And if that's the look that you're going for, then cool, you're done. You don't really need to do this. But I want to show you if you want to return some of that reflection back. To do that, on this layer, with this layer selected, I'm going to create a new layer mask. And then I'm going to select B for brush. I'm going to make sure that black is the foreground color selected over here. And I'm going to go with a low opacity. Low opacity and also a very soft brush. So hardness set to 0. And so with that, I'm just going to make a few strokes over here. And you can see how a little bit of the reflection starts to come back. And I'm really just going to focus on the bottom of my feet so that it doesn't look like I'm floating. And of course, if there's stuff that you don't want or the mask is revealing too much, you can just press X to swap to white as your foreground and then, remove some of that. So it's totally up to you. But here, because I kind of brought some of that reflection, it kind of seals everything up. And so to me, that's really cool. And then all we're left with is if you want to add any more stylization, to do that, what I would do is I would select the topmost layer and I would press Command Option Shift E on Mac or Control Alt Shift E, which will merge all visible layers. And so now we have kind of a new master layer. Even if we hide the underlying layers, we still have this layer here. Again, right click and go to Convert to Smart Object, just so that we can always come back and make any changes that will re-edit the layer. And then I'm going to go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, which really should just be called Develop Module, because it's basically Lightroom's Develop Module. And I'm just going to add a preset. I'm going to use one of my landscape AI presets. In this case here, I'm going to use one of the full scene presets, and I'm going to go to Subtle Scene Enhancer. And I'm going to click on that. And then with the strength slider, I'll bring it to 0, and I'll kind of just bring it up there. And you can see how it just kind of adds a little bit more punch to the photo. I'll also go to the edit window here, go all the way down to the effects panel, and I'm going to add a little bit of a vignette, just a little bit here. And then click OK. Now, because again, we made this a smart object, I can always go back to, if I double click here on the Camera Raw filter, I have access to everything. I can go here and change the vignette. I can go ahead and readjust the preset if I want. It's always smart to work with smart objects. And I actually did not mean for that terrible, terrible pun. And again, you can see this was the original photo. And so it's totally fine photo, but I feel like something like this once in a while is just really super cool. It just has a really fun effect. It's totally cool. And it's just something that you can enjoy. Like I can share this or print it. And people would stop and be like, whoa, that's pretty cool. Now I have another photo here, and I want to show you kind of how you can take path blur to an even cooler direction, so to speak. Now, before we jump in, just give me a few seconds. I just showed you one of my landscape AI presets. If you want the entire pack, all 30 presets, please click on the link in the description below. It includes, like I said, 30 presets, 10 of which will automatically select and edit the sky, 10 will automatically select and edit the foreground, and then 10 will automatically select the sky and foreground and create unique edits. I'm really proud of these presets. They're available in Lightroom, Lightroom Mobile, and as you can see in Adobe Camera Raw. Of course, any purchase that you make on my store directly supports me, and I greatly appreciate that. So thank you very much. All right, let's get back to it. All right, so here, this is a photo I took 10 years ago, actually. Oh man, 2013. And it is of my best friend, Matt Kliskowski. Many of you probably know him. We go way back, and this was taken in Bandon, Oregon. And I remember him standing on this rock, and I just thought it'd be a really cool photo. So I told him to just kind of stand there, and he obliged. And I had an ND filter on, so I was able to get this kind of long exposure while he was still sharp. So I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit faster. So I'll walk you through it, but it's basically the same process. First thing we're going to do is duplicate our layer, and then we're going to go to select and go to subject. Now, here's a good opportunity for me to show you how to modify a selection. You don't have to go crazy, but as you can see, Photoshop made this selection here. So you can remove it several ways. One of the ways I prefer is just taking the lasso tool and then pressing and holding on the Option key or Alt key. And you can see when I do that, the minus icon appears. So while pressing and holding Option or Alt, I'm just going to make a big selection around all this, and then it removes it. You can also further refine this. If you want to remove part of this area here, you can just, with the Option or Alt selected, further refine that. You don't have to go crazy. That's the thing. That's the nice thing about this particular style is you don't have to go crazy. However, I do want to add a little bit more to the selection here. You can see how it didn't get the entire rock that Matt was standing on. So similar to how I pressed the Option or Alt key to go to minus, if I press the Shift key, you see the plus icon appear. So I'm going to press and hold Shift, and I'm just going to make a selection right here around the rock. And if you don't like it, you can always press Command or Control Z to undo and then get a tighter selection. It's totally up to you, but I just wanted to show you that. And then also here, I'm going to add to the selection here with this piece of the rock as well. Okay, so now we have this selection here. Just like before, what I'm going to do is press Command Control J. So we put that on its own layer. I'm going to hide that and restore the selection. And then click on this middle layer here, and then we need to expand it. So I'm going to go to Select, Modify, Expand. Again, you can do 20, you can do 30. I'll do 20 in this case just to show you. Expands it a little bit, and then I'm going to press Shift Delete or Shift Backspace with Content Aware selected. Click OK, and that will remove Matt. And again, you can see that he's actually still there. No worries, we didn't get rid of Matt. But with this middle layer selected, I'm going to go to Filter, Blur Gallery, and then back to Path Blur. Now, before all we did was we just had one path. It was going from left to right. What I'm going to do this time is same thing. I'm going to kind of bring this arrow across the image here, relatively straight from left to right, except now I'm going to add a curve. And to add a curve, I'm just going to click over here. It adds a dot. And I'm going to bring this bar down, and you can see how the path bends. Let me bring up the speed of the blur so you can see how the blur is bending. It's basically following the path of this line. And that'd be cool if that was just it, right? But we can take it a step further and we can create, or rather simulate, a wave. So I'm going to click over here and add another dot, and I'm going to pop this one up and readjust kind of the position of the blur. And so you can see here how now you're getting this really interesting wave, and it kind of complements the actual photo because he's standing on a rock in the ocean. And so you're simulating this wave with the blur, which I think is so cool. Again, you can taper that if you want to reduce the kind of length of the blur. And sometimes that actually works really well, and it can serve to accentuate the wave. And then you can also add just a little bit of grain to add texture to the blur. And so here, and if you can spend as much time as you want really refining the position, because as you move it, you'll see kind of how the direction of the blur. And so it's totally up to you how you want it to look. But when you're done, all you need to do is click OK. That'll return you back. And the one thing I realized I forgot to do here was I forgot to convert this to a smart object. So we can actually undo that, right click, convert to smart object, and then go to Filter and select this Blur Gallery, which will reapply everything. And so it's just a quick way I wanted to show you in case you forgot to do a smart object, that as long as you remind yourself or you realize it right afterwards, you can undo, convert the layer to smart object, and then just go to Filter. And this top line item will always be the last filter that you executed. So as you can see here, we're back in business. And this time we have the layer as a smart object. So I can always go back. If I double click it, I can always go back and refine it. So that's really cool. Now, just like before, I want to go ahead, I'm going to add a layer mask, and I'm going to press B for my brush to make sure black is selected. And really, I'm only concerned about the edges of the rock and the bottom, as far as you see how it's this kind of hard edge. And so what I'll do is I'll increase the opacity just a little bit more with black as my foreground, and I'm going to just paint over the edges here. And what's happening is the original layer, which has moving water, is starting to appear. And it kind of softens the edges a little bit, and it makes it a little bit more realistic. I'm not worried about the really dark parts here, but the edges here, I would like to have a little bit softer. Of course, if you want to remove some of that mask, you can press X to swap from black as your foreground color to white and remove some of it so that it, you know, in case you want to remove any area that doesn't look good. But you can see here how, you know, this actually looks really cool, but we can make it look just a little bit cooler. Again, let's go ahead and press Command Option Shift E or Control Alt Shift E to create a new merged visible layer here. We'll go and right click, convert to Smart Object, and then we'll go to Filter, a Camera Raw filter over here. Let's go to the presets, and this time I'm going to go just to the foreground presets because I don't want to edit the sky. And I'm going to go to the aptly named Moving Water Enhancer preset. And you can see how it only selects the foreground. It's only editing the foreground, not the sky. And that's the power of adaptive presets, which is what all of these landscape AI presets are. Let's bring that strength to 0 and kind of bring it right around here. Again, I'm a sucker for a vignette, so I'm going to go here, add a little bit of a vignette, bring that midpoint down and add a feather. Then I'll click OK. And so let's hide these layers except for this one here. And you can see how, again, fun shot, great shot of Matt. But this to me, you know, if I gave this to Matt, I think he would really enjoy it. It's just a different, I don't think anyone's presented a photo of him or, you know, of yourself, for example, in this kind of a way, which is why I think it's always important to have fun when you're editing your photos. I just think it's, sometimes we get lost with making sure that the quality is at the max and that everything is perfect. We don't actually enjoy some of the things that we can do that technology allows us to do that we could never do before. So yeah, I hope this kind of inspires you. I hope it makes you excited to try different things. I have another video, speaking of kind of fun editing. One of my favorite things to do with photos is apply what's called an Orton effect. I've got a video here on how to do that. I actually have a video of how to do it on mobile as well, so I'll include both of them. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe and click on the bell icon so you get notified of all future videos. Thanks a lot, everyone.